Welcome to my short video showcasing my DES105 project, Protect the Otters. This is a small arcade-style game using some weird controls because, let's face it, it's not an arcade game if you're just using some basic controls. There's plenty of menus showcasing the options and how to play, all of which use keyboard controls to fit with the keyboard controls that the game leads into. This entire game's movement is progressed by moving your hand physically across the keyboard. So each key moves to an adjacent one, and pressing it again fires. And the objective is to fight off hordes of enemies that are all just the natural predators to an otter. The little goldfish you just saw fly past is the collectible of my game, which summons halfway through a wave, and shooting will gain you a lot of points. As well as the enemies, of course, being the other way to gain points. Each enemy has its specific value, and there's a little more to the point system, but it's a bit complicated, so I'm not going to describe it here. The game is comprised of multiple waves, each one summoning a unique enemy pattern that is predefined. Out of the 4 types of enemies, ranging from the orcas, the oil tankers, the fishing boats, and the rowboats. Each of them has a different property, and once you run out of health, you get to find out if you beat the high score. And if you didn't, well, it's time to try again. So now that you know about the game, it's time to get into some of the scripts. The movement, as mentioned earlier, is a bit odd based on the fact every single key is a position on a grid. So there's 4 arrays to show this, each containing every key that is a position in the game. There was originally a 4th row of keys, but mainly due to the spacebar being too large and being able to zip straight from X to the less than ruined the flow a bit, eventually got scrapped. It's got your default position both on the grid and the key code position. It's got the target position in the game world to move around between each of the keys. It's got your keys down and your key held, this is for the charging, and this is to stop you from zipping straight across the map by holding down an entire row. It's got some just movement stuff, and it's got the 2 animations, which is what swaps between the swim and the idle stance. So the way this works is it finds its new position, and it does that by running through every array of keys, checks until it finds the one that you're at, and gets your coordinates. And after it's got the coordinates, it will check if you're holding your key down. So this means if you're holding it down, you're charging your weapon, so you can't move, so that you can't just drag it about to make charging actually a risk. And assuming you aren't, it will find a new position. And finding a new position, once again, runs through each array of keys, but first round it checks just how many keys are down, so that you can't zip across the map. And if you aren't holding many, then it will check if the next key is suitable. It does this by checking the hexagon around your current key. So it'll check the 2 above, the 2 on either side, and the 2 below it. And all of these pluses and minuses are just to get the correct key, because it's not the same above and below. And after it's got your key, you've got to move to it. So what it does is it figures out which coordinates it's got to go to based on its coordinate in the grid. So for this part, it gets the default X coordinate and its Y coordinate, and then just moves it as many grid spaces as it should be to get the correct X position. And after it's got that, it will then move by just going 1/10 of the distance 10 times. And here's where it checks if it's in the correct animation, and if it isn't, it sets it to be. And then as soon as it stops moving, it goes back to the idle animation. And that is how all the player movement works. So the next code to look at is the Wave Manager script. These change the frame rate target for the game and turns off VSync so that this can work. This, combined with the timescale being changed, just makes the game run more consistently and at the speed that it's wanted. Every single script, I may as well address now, is a fixed update so that it runs consistently and also so that the game can be paused easily. Because that just means everything can be stopped at once because it all runs on the timescale. So the first thing the Wave Manager actually checks, because the score's in here, is it just sets the score for the end screen. All of this is getting the score. If you're in the menu where the score's shown, it will get the score. It will check if you've got a high score. If you do, it'll tell you you've got a high score, play the little high score sound, and then it's done. And throughout the entire game, it's checking if the high score's below your score, it's a high score, and it says this is a high score, run. And the high score is just rounded again just to make it look nice. The wave, this is just the delays between it. So whenever there's no enemies, there's a big delay. Once the delay is done, it summons the new wave, which resets the delay for next time, gets the wave number from the wave setup, and adds 1 to it, because it doesn't add the wave until the wave has actually started. And this just keeps everything running how it should be. And it sets the amount of enemies. Then in here, it will change each of the setups to start its new wave, which will increment the wave and just make everything work. And then it checks the wave number based on the string, because the wave number isn't actually the number, because each wave has multiple parts. But based on the name of the wave, it'll set how many enemies there are, leading up to wave 8, with quite a few, because that's just you will die at this point, and it resets the enemies to be how they should be. And then there is whenever an enemy dies, which the score is also in here, just because the enemy deaths had to be affected in here, so it just made sense to put it all together. So it checks which type of name you've got. All the enemies are still referenced by their development name when I just had the function they performed. And each of them have their own score value based on how much trouble they cause the longer they're alive, giving a lower score to try and encourage you to keep them alive, because you get more points based on how many enemies are alive. And if you're in the final wave, because the enemies all amount is really big, it breaks the score system a bit when it's giving you 200 million points every time, so it just caps at 10. With the mechanical design of the game and some of the scripts out of the way, it's time to talk about how this relates to ecology. Sea otters are endangered animals, and every hazard, all the things that damage you, are all adding to this. You've got the predators, humans fishing and harming them, oil tankers breaking open, spilling into the ocean, and all of these are just reducing their numbers and leading to potentially the extinction. The gameplay is about avoiding all of these hazards to keep the otter alive as long as possible. You have to dodge the fishing nets, the fishing hooks, the oil spills, the orcas, and of course all the ships that contain those, whilst destroying them to make it easier for the otters to survive.